Yes. Hello, Uwe. Wonderful to see you. Thank you for having me back. Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me back.
And I especially enjoy using this for that.
What did you talk about today? What did you say?
Rich
That's right.
Oh my gosh.
I was giving you setups.
Eat them up, Rich.
Oh,
Let's
no.
see, Lance.
Did I bring a knife to another gunfight?
So, love to see you. Seems like a cool game.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Karen Tucker, and on behalf of both the Churchill Club and GABA, I'm very pleased to welcome you to tonight's program, Cloud Computing, What's Next? We have with us Simon Crosby from Citrix, Dave Girouard from Google, Lou Moorman from Rackspace, Kai Vandeloo from SAP, Lance Berc from Vmware, and of course, our moderator, Rich Miller from Telematica. Everyone, welcome, and thank you very much for being here. And I would also like to thank SAP for sponsoring and hosting tonight's event, especially Gunter Schmalzoff and Bernhard Schultzke. Let's give them a round of applause. A few words about the two nonprofit co-hosts for this event. First, Churchill Club is the prominent business and technology forum in our region with 7,000 members, now celebrating its 25th year. This organization is known for smart and provocative programs on leadership and innovation and excellent networking. Recent speakers have included the filmmaker James Cameron, Eric Schmidt, and Scott McNeely. The German-American Business Association, of course known as GABA, is also a member-supported organization. GABA promotes transatlantic knowledge sharing and networking among German-American and California business and technology communities. GABA has chapters in both Northern and Southern California and a third in Berlin. So I hope you'll learn more about our two organizations. For more details, please visit our respective websites at churchillclub.org and gaba-network.org. And please do consider joining and supporting our efforts. Finally, please check your programs, your printed programs, for Twitter codes. If you're tweeting, we suggest that you include hashtag Churchill Club so that all can follow along. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce Rich Miller, CEO of Telematica. Rich has been building cloud infrastructure and data technologies for more than 20 years. So that means he was involved with cloud computing way before cloud was cool. And up until a few years ago, he says that it was referred to as grid computing or utility computing, but today it's all about the cloud. So let's turn this over to Rich, and he'll get the conversation started. Please give your warmest welcome to Rich Miller.
Thanks very much, and Karen, thank you very much for inviting me to act as moderator tonight. This is going to be easy duty and very entertaining because we have an absolutely stellar group here, the right people from whom you should be getting advice, getting direction, and to whom you should be asking some pointed questions. So let them have it. Just to begin with, let's kind of set the stage. We should probably take a quick introduction here, give a one or two sentence what you do for your various companies, and then I'll kind of reiterate the sets of questions and we'll kick it off. So, Lance?
Excuse me. I'm Lance Berc, and I've been with Vmware since we started fielding our enterprise products a little over 9 years ago. And many of you have been with us along for the journey of moving from physical machines into the virtual world and now into the cloud. My primary responsibilities have been working with our customers and our partners on leading edge and cutting edge uses of our technology, learning from them to help drive innovation back through our engineering process so that we can continue to provide better products for all of you.
Simon?
My name's Simon Crosby. I was one of the founders of a company called ZenSource, which worked on the Zen hypervisor. I'm now CTO for data center and cloud at Citrix Systems.
David?
I'm Dave Girouard. I'm president of the enterprise division at Google. I've been there for just over 7 years, and we are focused on applications in the cloud and more and more platform in the cloud, and also cloud-enabled devices through our Android and Chrome platforms.
Lou?
I'm Lou Moorman. I'm with Rackspace. Been at the company 11 years. I'm Chief Strategy Officer, and I'm also responsible for our cloud product offers, which are, we have traditional hosting offers as well as cloud offers, which we sort of, is our software-powered infrastructure offers that are currently about 15% of our business and growing quite quickly.
Great. Kai?
I'm Kai Vanderloo. I run technology strategy for SAP. And so trying to match the business needs of our customers, the solutions, applications we're building with what's going on in the technology world. And cloud and virtualization are related technologies we believe are extremely important to us today and even more so going forward.
Thanks very much. So the questions that were set out for us this evening were about cloud computing. And you wouldn't be here if you didn't know at least a little bit about cloud computing. And unless you've been living under a rock in this valley, you've been completely inundated with any number of stories, questions, assertions about cloud computing. What we were asked to do is talk about really the last 2 or 3 years. Where has cloud computing had its biggest impact, and on whom has it had the impact? Where has there been resistance? What have been the barriers? And I've thrown in an additional question, because these are the guys from whom I want to hear this answer. Where have you been most surprised over the last 2 years? What weren't you expecting to have happen? Either good or bad. So to just start things out, from your point of view, Lance, VMware has had 10 years and more of an incredible run. It's been a fundament of the cloud computing kind of philosophy. It's moved extremely, it's almost been associated, cheek by jowl. In the last 2 years, what's been the really big impact? Where has it been really focused? And what have been the surprises?
Well, I think that we've really just begun. I think that what we've seen in the last few years is only a tip of the iceberg, or the beginnings of something that's really going to change in the next probably 4 or 5 years. We've started to see people think about their compute needs more separated from the underlying hardware environment than the way they ever did before. And with those changes comes the need for a different level of management, of control, of billing, of access, of data access, of trust. And we've just really started into that. And we see a lot of concern when you ask about what the resistance has been. It's been mostly in terms of trust. Can I take my corporate data and put it somewhere else? What are the controls that we have to have in place? What are the SLAs that have to be in place? What are the features for failure that have to be in place? And those questions are only now beginning to be answered.
And would you draw a kind of a quick distinction from your point of view between VMware and its mission with respect to virtualization and VMware with respect to its missions regarding cloud computing?
We look at the virtualization as an underpinning of cloud computing. It's necessary in order to get the utilization of your underlying physical resources, just plant utilization, if you will. Cloud computing is really a style of computing. It's a style of application development. It's a style of scale. And we see different tool sets that are necessary to accomplish that. Today we made an announcement of the Cloud Foundry, something we've been working on for a couple of years, something that will allow people a different model of development of their applications, different ways of doing maintenance, and something that we think will really accelerate the adoption of the cloud school.
An adoption by whom?
We're looking at a very broad set of people that will be adopting this. One of the differentiators of the Cloud Foundry is that it's something that can be run by our partners, by our service provider partners. It's also something that you can run internally. We see different kinds of users that will be deploying this either in their own data centers or possibly in someone else's data center, or actually in a hybrid model where you can move things back and forth. And this transportation of your application between different places it might be deployed is one of the very important aspects that we see necessary for a cloud adoption.
Thanks. Any big surprises? What's been the most surprising thing over the course of the last 2 years for you?
Well, much of what we've been deploying into has been legacy environments. And what we've done is enabled people to take their existing IT infrastructures and get much better utilization of modern hardware without really having to change very much in the way of business process. To really adapt to the cloud model, you have to look at rewriting some of your applications, or maybe when you do new application development, you'll deploy it in a new model. And I've been really surprised at the willingness of CIOs and CTOs of our customers to say that on some kind of schedule of their app maintenance schedule, it's a multi-year kind of rolling schedule, their willingness to actually look at rewriting the applications that they're using to run their business, to take that risk in order to gain the benefits of this new model.
So the speed with which they've gone from kind of virtualization and cloud looking backward to legacy and kind of bringing it in to kind of the greenfield moving forward, that's been the speed with which that's been kind of embraced. That's the big surprise?
Well, I always thought that the greenfield would be the low-hanging fruit. What surprised me was the willingness to take existing infrastructure and move that also into a cloud kind of deployment, even if they take on the risk of having to rewrite working applications.
Great, thank you. Actually, Simon, this is great lead-in. Given some of the things we've heard from you earlier today, sense of where's been the adoption, where's the resistance, and what's been the big surprise for you?
What's been the big surprise for me is the virtualization. Well, cloud has been a little bit like vinaigrette. It's been a vinaigrette that's been shaken up, and so you see this murky liquid, and then suddenly it separates into two layers. There's the vinegar bit and the oil bit. And I've seen two kinds of cloud emerge. One which is focused around taking IT, enterprise IT, down a process of progressive automation. And that's what Lance just described. And I think it's a fabulous journey, and if you aren't on it, you should be. The other one, which is the big surprise, is the public cloud and the impact that it is having on everybody's lives. And I'm sure my friends on the panel here are going to speak to that very strongly. What I have seen coming into the enterprise segment has been that model. That is, let's just classify what that notion of cloud is. It's not about IT, it's about applications. So it's a DevOps notion of cloud. I should perhaps qualify that slightly. This is where there aren't any IT people. Okay, so the kinds of clouds that I've been interacting with, and I'm sitting next to somebody from Google who's smiling, I'm sure. There are no people inside there. There are no IT people. They're not sitting watching monitors or dragging VMs between servers.
Now,
and so that model, it's coming into the enterprise. It's coming into the enterprise faster than anything that I've ever seen. And you know how it's coming in? You walk it into the enterprise, every day, in your pocket, on your iPhone. Okay, and the biggest change impacting enterprise IT is consumerization. We as consumers are driving new app consumption methods and new kinds of infrastructure into the IT department every day because we walk in with our devices. And that category, if you look up the apps on your iPhone or your iPad or whatever device happens to be your Android device, that stuff does not run on the kind of infrastructure that Glance just described. They're both equally valid. They're both delivering phenomenal benefits. But this latter category is growing extremely fast.
Great. Actually, let me jump for a second and ask Kai to respond, because we just had two people speaking about, from their point of view of their companies, coming in the infrastructure and the mid-range, the platforms on which they're built. Now, with SAP, which attends, as we learned earlier today, very much now to the platform and, of course, to the applications itself. What's been the big change? Where have the barriers been? What's been the big surprise?
The big surprise, I think, is that there still is confusion about cloud. I would have expected that to go away quite a while ago, but people still seem to be relatively confused. I think the world was all simple up to a few years ago when we all would have agreed with kind of what you've been talking about. Cloud is somehow virtualization of infrastructure and automation. On top of this, you get a nice abstracted, elastically scaling infrastructure. But then our friends at Salesforce and others started slapping the cloud label on everything under the sun.
Well, Larry stuck it on some hardware, right?
He stuck it on some hardware. At first he didn't want it at all, and then he stuck it on some hardware, and it's like, that confusion still is around, I think, is a little bit sad.
Has cloud lost its meaning?
I think it has lost its meaning unless we redefine it again. And why cell phones now are part of the cloud, I just sometimes don't get it. So that's right. That is a little bit surprising to me, but never mind. Much more interesting than that, I think, is the uptake which we see among our customers. Even systems like ours are being deployed on virtual infrastructures. They are being deployed on clouds, even out on public clouds quite a lot. We have a lot of demand for supporting SAP systems, production systems, not just test and development systems. Actually, on public clouds.
That's really an important issue right there. One of the things that I wanted to make sure we covered today is, what have your customers been pushing you to do? Where have they been resistant? And much of the story behind cloud used to be great for test, great for development, don't trust it for production. It's not safe, it's not compliant, it's not performant, it's not resilient. That seems to be going away, and going away very rapidly.
I was thinking earlier that I think I've seen the most resistance among naysayers. Mm-hmm. So I think I've essentially seen two kinds of customers. The ones who've been looking at it as an opportunity and have been trying to find reasons for putting systems out in the cloud, have been looking for ways of doing it, ways to work around all of these things. And of course, if you start putting your most sensitive data out there first, before you have figured out how to deal with security and stuff, that's kind of a dumb thing to do. But not all the data you have in your enterprise is highly sensitive. Pick something that's not. Mm-hmm. Not everything needs to have the perfect SLA, or pick the things that are suitable for cloud deployment. And that's, I think, what the companies who have been successful with this have been successful, because they have been picking the right things to do, not because they may be technically more clever.
By the way, let me just interject. I think that he's describing the IT acceptable model of cloud. As far as I'm concerned, the safest place for all your data is the cloud.
Yeah.
Let's be very clear. Okay? And what convinced me of this is WikiLeaks. Okay? The more humans there are running around your data, the worse off you are, for sure. Okay? The next thing is, if you wanted a place where you could guarantee that it would always be available, no matter what data center went down or what link went down or anything else, it would be the cloud. So if you want to deliver an application 24/7, 365, it's called the cloud.
And that's a perfect segue to the last two members of our panel. David, you know, Google App Engine, the range of apps. Where have you seen, you know, the biggest adoption? Where has been the resistance, and what's been the surprise?
Sure. Let me describe what I think has been the biggest impact to date, and how the implications for the enterprise. I think the biggest impact has been right here in Silicon Valley in two ways. Technology startups and the venture capitalists that fund them. The reason being, it costs ridiculously less to have a startup and build a company these days than it did 10 years ago. You don't need to own anything. You don't need to own anything. And you can have a startup, and if you're successful, you can make it profitable and go quickly. Where something years ago, you would have had to get $20 or $30 million investment to get started. Mm-hmm. So that very simple idea that compute power is available elsewhere. You don't need to buy servers. You don't actually need to use own as a company the computers or the phones that people use to do their work, believe it or not. They can own them themselves, and there's a lot of good reasons why that makes sense. So that to me actually right home in Silicon Valley has been the biggest impact. It's changed the investment industry, it's changed the profile of entrepreneurs, and it's changed the nature of competition. What does that mean in the enterprise? It means a lot. The culture of ownership and control is over. And the idea that you need to control, own all of your assets, your computing assets, is going away very, very quickly. I do believe certainly there will always be core systems, the ones that are fundamental, very center of your business, probably the ones running SAP or running other types of proprietary things that you will run on-premise. You will certainly want to virtualize them for all the right reasons to get the most out of the systems you buy. But fundamentally, the vast majority of your computing needs will happen elsewhere. And it's a very liberating concept. It's not only liberating, it's required. And I do believe, to get to the security question, it is a complete, it's an understandable sentiment that cloud equals risky and sensitive data should not go to the cloud. I think it's a flawed one, and I think, Google and Rackspace, Salesforce, others like us, we have to prove that over time, both with fact and with track record. But I think I think we can make a case, and we do this every single day to companies that are considering using our cloud services, that your data is safer in our data centers, being protected by our technology and our people, than it is in your own. And I feel very, having done this for several years, I'm confident of that. I don't think the whole world believes it right away, and I think there's a cultural aspect that is entirely different from the technology aspect that you have to deal with. But I think the world is discovering this, and so I think what you're seeing in venture capital and startup world is a sort of a leading indicator of where things are going.
What's been the biggest surprise?
I'll tell you, for me, is having seen, first of all, there's two parts to it. The absolute explosion of mobility and smartphones. I mean, that whole thing, it was a year ago, a little more than a year ago, I saw, it was May 2010, Mary Meeker came to a Google event, told us about how in 2012, smartphones were going to outsell PCs for the first time. And what happened in Q4 2010.
And this is 1 year old.
Yeah, that ancient device you have over there is a year old. But so the explosion of that is incredible, and you have to certainly give Apple a tremendous amount of credit. But the other thing is, the fact that such diversity in devices has permeated virtually every enterprise in the world, to me, is staggering. I mean, the sort of lock in the sort of RIM exchange sort of structure that every single company had and every executive had, I would have guessed it would have taken 10 years for that to be even modestly changed. And literally, in a period of a couple of years, I don't think I see a CIO who doesn't walk in carrying an iPad or an iPhone or an Android phone or what have you. It's just amazing how fast it is.
Right. And it's interesting because as I go to Lou, one of the things that you didn't mention in this equation that's changed the way companies start and build and do so kind of on the fly at very, very low cost has to do with the tools and the software underpinnings that they have available to them. And here with Rackspace, we've got a company that not only is delivering cloud services, but is probably one of the most noticeable and notable companies pushing on aspects of the open source and open source cloud underpinnings. Again, one of the big contributors to making this possible. So, Lou, from your point of view.
Yeah, so just to start at the beginning, I mean, I think that the way I think about cloud computing as a concept generally is it is about a supply revolution. If you think about the mainframe era, that was the exclusive era held by a few privileged people in the company. The PC era was controlled. The IT department still determined what you could do with computers. The cloud era is really about unlimited, truly unlimited, available to everybody, accessible. And so I think that the biggest winners in an era like unlimited computing are the people who didn't have it before. So the employee has power over the IT department, big power.
And is it the power just to have computing, or is it the power to define and declare what they want?
And to use it, shape it, turn it into results. Is that the average employee today can create and deploy applications. They might have restrictions, but they will find ways around them. Whether it's their iPad or their desktop or their home computer, they will find ways around them. So they did not have that power. But I echo the other person who gets it now is the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur is getting the better end of the stick against VCs today. Right. No question about it. Look at these valuations.
Right.
And it's, they have enormous power. I think resistors, for those on the other side of the equation, is that the IT department is these are big shifts, big changes, the loss of control, and the IT department has a big responsibility to protect the company. It's a hard thing in a new era. I would say the technology incumbents. Everything is changing. The technology stack. The incumbents of technology have a lot to defend. I would say that the whole notion of private cloud is a way of saying, let's automate. It's not really a shift.
Okay, so just before we end, big surprise. What, in the last 2 years, what surprised you the most? Either in a positive or negative way?
I think that it's, this is a, it probably echoes some of the other areas. I think it has been, Gartner has this sort of trough disillusionment. It says all these technologies go through these these sort of ups and downs.
Hype cycle.
I have not seen that in this space. It has been up and to the right from the beginning, and it has happened faster. It's happened more broadly than I think anyone would have expected. And perhaps the economic downturn helped that because it forced everyone to rethink things. Everyone had to get more resourceful, creative. But this has been a movement that I think has been very fast and very straight line.
Also powered by open source. I mean, Google as well as you guys, open source drives the continuous innovation curve, which allows you to get into service sooner, which allows you to out of that trough of disillusionment.
Right. So there are a couple of themes. One, looking kind of cloud backward, kind of saying, let's take our existing legacy, things that we already know how to do or think we do, and bring it into the cloud. And then there's, let's start fresh with cloud, moving forward, build the stuff that we want to build now that we haven't been able to build up until now for one reason or another. So it's the cloud looking backward, cloud looking forward. Is that one of the reasonable ways of going through and saying, now let's look at the next 2 or 3 years. Who's going to change? How is it going to change? Who's going to suddenly be the adopter that we haven't seen to date? And where will the resistance come? Where will the surprises come? Where will the barriers to or the detours likely be for the people sitting in this audience? Any thoughts about that?
I'm pretty sure that in a couple of years' time there'll be an Oracle product which will be like 12 or 13C. Like it was G, it was I when it was internet, it was G when it was grid. There'll be a C at some point, probably in a few years' time.
Right. Oracle
So
C.
that's my confident prediction. There will be an Oracle
Those-
something C.
No, some numeral C. Kai?
I don't think that this cloud looking back, cloud looking forward makes too much sense, because I think most of the things we do going forward, building new things, are tied to old things. Very little new things come to exist in a vacuum. So I think it's very dangerous to kind of think about putting old things in the cloud versus building entirely new things as decoupled. It's about doing both of them. It's about how do we bring existing things into the cloud and extend them with new things in new and smarter ways.
I really want to agree with that. What we have, businesses, our customers, those businesses are run by existing infrastructure. And people want two things as they move forward. They want greater agility, they want greater efficiency. And they're going to use new methodologies to get at those requirements. At the same time, they have to keep their existing systems ticking over because that's what runs their business. So it's going to be about how do you take the existing information and turn it into services that can then be accessed through cloud techniques with all of the other protection and control and access to data that you have today. And putting your data, when you said that that IT has a difficult job of protecting data, that is very, very true. When you take your corporate identity and your corporate data and you give it to someone else and all you have left is an SLA, and if they say, I lost your data, oops, I'm sorry, your business is dead, the board has no one to go to. So I think that there's going to continue to have corporate data owned within corporate data centers for a long time because you cannot give up the essence of your business to someone else. There are some pieces you simply cannot outsource.
But isn't confidential information sent over email in every company, every day? What confidential information is not sent over email?
Is the access to that email through unprotected, open communication channels stored in databases or in file systems that are not owned by the company and that are not accountable through the CIO to the board.
Absolutely.
Not in my company.
Why does owning them have anything to do with it? I mean, is your board going to feel any better when you tell them that your data's gone and dead and you did it yourself?
They'll have someone to fire and they'll feel better.
Well,
So it's all about them feeling they have
So
control.
the thing that I would say
Feeling.
on sort of the going forward versus looking
Looking
back,
backward.
I'd say that the number of applications that going to exist going forward so exponentially exceed what exists today because of this supply revolution. I mean, the mainframe business is still big business. It's just irrelevant compared to the PC era.
I'm not.
And the things that are going to get built is going to explode. Applications are getting built all over companies, and it's going to outnumber the existing applications to over time, where those will start to creep into the cloud. But look, legacy applications die hard. They just die hard. They have a long.
We live on them. We depend on them.
That's right. That's right. And they will live a long time, and they will live a long time in corporate data centers.
Yeah.
It just will become very small compared to the new applications that get built.
That's right, but there's a good notion of a private cloud, even for something like a desktop, right? Which is something I want all my desktops to operate as a cloud. By the way, it serves again by going back to my wiki example. Corporate desktop is Windows, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have 100,000 independent experiments in how to track malware based on every one of your independent end users with their varying copies of Windows. You can deliver a desktop experience from the cloud. You're centralizing control. You're centralizing a single image. Everybody runs one copy of the apps, and all you care about is the different data that everybody gets and consumes and produces. And so you can deliver a desktop as a service. The economics of that are fine. That is, they're better than owning a PC, but the security and centralization benefits that we argue for cloud anyway apply. That is, security arises from centralization and control.
Here's the problem. Do you not think that in most companies there are people collaborating on confidential information unauthorized.
Absolutely.
I guarantee it. And every one of these companies who think they're secure.
But I must say, I disagree with
We
this
can help you with that.
There are fundamental premise. How did we get into this discussion?
We think we're a lot secure than we are, and
Well,
There
But
is
I think there
insider
was-
trading happening every day also, but that doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's how you should run things, just because it's happening.
this is about user control, the users taking control.
It's about control and of access to the data.
okay.
Right.
And so,
And this is what I was going to kind of.
Please.
I don't know how we got into this, because who said that the task of IT is to protect the data? I think the task of IT is to get value out of the data, not to protect it. That's like something I need to think about at some point in time to protect it. But the whole task is to get value out of this thing. And if it's not IT, if it's somebody else
Right.
in the company who figures out how to get value out of it, so much better. And the task of IT.
the old joke about librarians who, think it's their job to keep all the library books in the library as opposed to out. Again, this is getting our mission correct and getting the mission straight. But that said, what it does mean, in my mind, is attention to things like data residency, looking much more carefully at the kinds of protections and the kinds of technologies that can be brought to bear that provides data provenance, being able to look and go back and see who's been using Google Docs in order to create, at least some pressure on the people who are engaging in this nefarious business to
Since we're being
to
accused,
stop.
since we're being used as the example of rampant data leakage and disregard for Google, allow me to defend Google Docs a bit. I would tell you that when a company uses Google Docs, their data into Google Docs is more secure than anything on any of their hard drives or thumb drives or any
Right.
of the many other places.
Unless your
And-
password is password.
and you know who's using it. You actually have a chance to set policy. Should this department be able to share documents outside the company or not? You can track what sort of documents are coming and going much more than you ever could on one of your traditional systems. So
And I think
you've already jumped to a conclusion that I think is misinformed,
Yeah,
that
so-
something in the cloud is less secure.
My
the
point
concern
my point
arises-
is the false sense of security, is that by owning your data center, suddenly my data is secure. That is the bigger point, which is that what really drives security, what really doesn't.
People drive security. Simon's WikiLeaks example is a low-ranking officer in the Army took his data, right, and gave it to somebody.
Right.
Okay? Now, there is no data center in the world, public, private, or hybrid, that's going to protect you against someone taking
No.
the data, your secret documents, and giving it
No,
to
but-
someone else, and then getting caught and going to jail for it.
No, there's
Deservedly so.
The specific example of WikiLeaks is actually quite simple, because if you had a delivered user experience, so in other words, if you had centralized all the data, you could prohibit them from writing it onto USB sticks. Okay. So specifically, centralization is good. The data can be presented in various forms, and so you can prevent that kind of attack. But it's all subject to control. And so the argument here is really down to a legacy notion of IT, which says, my God, we're out of control. How can we lock the users down? Because we know that computer systems are frail and there are too many gazinters and gazatters and everything else, versus automated systems, which take computing as a basic assumption and implement in the next generation of IT, in a sense. The right way to do this stuff in a way in which humans don't get to make the same errors. Okay, now, the leap of faith is the computer system which is running Google Docs, the computer system which is running Rackspace Cloud, flawless? Well, no, but it's presumably, so yes, there is a need for oversight. There is a need for certification and a whole bunch of other things that one could impose on these folks and rationally would want to do so. But any assertion that humans interfering with computer systems will do a better job of security in the long term is fundamentally flawed.
I think that's, and actually, let's wrap up the conversation specifically about security and the security of data. One of the things I think almost all of us can agree is that the the threat that putting your data in the cloud is inherently less secure, that it is, you're putting yourself at risk automatically by placing data in the cloud. This is probably a falsehood, and it's a falsehood that's being demonstrated on a daily basis.
But take just one last statement. Take the anonymous attacks after WikiLeaks funding was pulled and everything else. The guys who are running their own data centers, PayPal, boom, dead. Visa, boom, dead, right? And then these anonymous folks turn their big cannons, the Loic thing, on Amazon Web Services, and they didn't even blink. So imagine you had to run you had to run an app that had to run 24/7, 365. Where would you run it? In your own data center, where you can be taken out by anybody sitting on their PC, or a bunch of these guys, or in a big place with lots of capacity, with huge resources dedicated to protecting your app and geographic diversity and everything else? Where would you run it?
Well, and scalability to basically spread the attack. I'd put it on Rackspace.
I think this is a classic specialization issue. There's a reason why
Exactly.
commercial airliners are safer than private planes. Is that they have a huge infrastructure, they have systems built to do it. If something wrong happens, they're extremely embarrassed.
There's
The
a lot of people
incentives
that
are
want-
high.
Right.
This is what happens in a very technical, specialized industry. Is that sort of all the incentives for people like
Right.
us and Amazon and Google to sort of keep these things. Are we flawless? Are we perfect? Of course not. But we have a strong incentive for every flaw to be covered up and to be remedied as
Right.
quickly as possible.
And they have a huge set of regulations that they have to follow,
And
a
procedure.
huge set of procedure and federal oversight to make sure that they actually meet it.
Right. And actually, that's a great segue, because
There are federally compliant top secret clouds. It's just
there
one of-
there are.
And so this is, again, there's no reason to own your own facility. There are service providers out there, there's several of them, who are top secret certified.
Are you making the counter argument to Rich? Do you agree with Rich's
No,
comment or no? Around that it's inherently safer to have in your own data center?
Am I making this?
Lance.
Oh, I
Lance.
can tell who you're looking at.
Lance.
Oh.
Yeah.
I think that it's, to have data in your own data center gives you more control over the ability to verify all of the systems that are in place for protecting it. Okay? So it's a matter of trust,
Okay.
not a matter of if it's actually more or less safe.
That's, so actually, let's actually move just one step away from the technology of cloud and of data security, and let's talk a little bit about trust and regulatory issues and compliance. Right now, one of the big supposed barriers, coming right after it's not secure to put your data in the cloud, has been, I can't get my application to meet a compliance audit. Now, is that our job to knock down as quickly as possible? Is it somebody else's? Is this likely to be one of the biggest barriers to cloud adoption over the course of the next 2 or 3 years? Any thoughts about compliance?
I think the need to be compliant with anything, whether it's HIPAA or PCI, take your pick, doesn't change an iota. It's just obviously just important. But there's no reason that a cloud specialist can't be focused on having PCI compliance, HIPAA compliance, FISMA compliance. There's any list of them. And again, I think specialization says there's probably a fair chance they actually may be better at ensuring that compliance. Now, of course, the other thing is there needs to be verifiable compliance, audited and such. And those are all things that there are ways and means for cloud providers to do that. And so I don't think ultimately that's going to be a barrier. It can be it's going to take a lot of work by the cloud providers to one by one deal with each of these things. Particularly, I think a lot of, in my opinion at least, one of the most difficult areas is data privacy law in Europe, because frankly it's a mess in terms of jurisdiction and overlapping, conflicting laws between safe harbor, which a lot of the DPAs in Europe really have disdain for, and so there's a lot of areas like that that are very complicated, won't get solved overnight. They're going to require technology solutions, policy solutions, everything. But most of the things, if you just think of the more basic HIPAA or what have you, those are ultimately very solvable.
Those are addressable.
I think that
there are good
not
arguments.
only are they addressable, there are opportunities for differentiation. And that's
Agreed.
something that you'll pay a premium for.
Pay premium for, but I mean, why wouldn't you, if you can get your app into a cloud run by a guy who's top secret qualified running a bunch of stuff for the NSA, then he's got, the NSA is picking up the bill for security guys outside. So why would you not go for a free ride on cloud security provided by the guy who is the most demanding customer?
Because that guy's probably paid so much by the NSA he can't touch your data.
That's right.
But to this point, this may in fact be the kinds of specialization that will add to the differentiation and the way in which customers will distinguish among the vendors of technology and services because they have special requirements, including
But
compliance.
I think it's fair to point out that all of those exist. That is, you can go and get those things today.
Exactly. And in fact, we're already seeing in the infrastructure as a service some very clear, distinct specialists who will take storage and security of data as defined by FISMA so that they can address a governmental market. You'll find others that are making sure that they can deliver to their customer a solution that's cost effective but will pass PCI DSS. And we'll see that time and time and again. What has surprised me is actually the speed with which that has happened, because quite frankly, the slowest thing on the face of the planet is regulation and law that impacts our industry. It is, always 5 to 10 years out of date and referring to technology that's usually 10 years or older. So the fact that we're making as much progress as speedily as we have is actually quite encouraging to me. So thinking once again about a future history of cloud for this audience, are there a couple of surprises in store for all of us that you think might be on the way? Are there black swans that are going to come swooping in and suddenly change the nature of the way we decide when to go to virtualization, when do we go to cloud, when do we design, how do we compose our applications? Any thoughts about this, Kyle?
I think there are a number of applications that we have today that we think of as very traditional back-end data center type applications. There is certain pieces of that functionality that somebody's going to figure out how to build in a cloud-native way, both in terms of the underlying infrastructure, so they're going to be scalable, and in terms of consumption, accessible from anywhere, that are totally going to change the way we work with these apps and the value they deliver. Unfortunately, I don't really know exactly what they are, so I would immediately go build one, but I'm sure that there are going to be things that we have been thinking of so far as typical back-end IT apps that somebody's going to reinvent in the cloud, really make them cloud native. We're all going to stand there later and say, how did this happen? Why didn't
we do this? Lou, any thoughts about what might be the surprises that we're likely to encounter?
Well, I mean, I think that there's no denying this is going to be an enormous opportunity, enormous market. And because of that, there's a huge amount of capital going into it. I think that people are going to be surprised by, particularly those that are in businesses that are doing nothing like cloud computing, they're going to be surprised by getting into it. I've been in the hosting world for 11 years, and when in 2000, hosting, which was cloud computing version 1, was very hot. And Dell and Intel and Sprint others spent hundreds of millions of dollars of capital to get into that business. And it was a very different business than their core business. And I think the business model shift going from software to infrastructure services or from systems integration to infrastructure services, I think is going to be a harder shift for many. Just like going from being an ISV to being a software as a service company is a big shift. Very few very few traditional software vendors made a great shift to the SaaS industry. And so I think that you've got a ton of capital going in. I think it's going to be a surprising business model shift for a lot of folks.
David?
I actually think, I don't exactly know what application or what technology is going to do it, but I think you're going to see turmoil in that companies are going to be born and become Fortune 100 companies, not in technology industries, but far afield, almost overnight, because they're so technology savvy and technology forward. That could be an airline, it could be an oil company, it could be a manufacturer, it could be anything. But I think you're going to see these companies pop up overnight that you just can't believe how fast somebody can be a many billions of dollar global company, and they seem to have come from nowhere, and they seem to look completely different than anything you've ever seen before. And I think the technology is there for almost any industry to get disrupted by information and ability to scale incredibly fast. I think we're going to see that.
Simon, big disruptors?
In terms of the enterprise world, I think that the next generation client platform is here. And we're going to see enterprises, we're already seeing enterprises develop native apps for tablet form factor devices, whether that be Android or iOS or whatever. And the back end of that, the thing that runs that app, is cloud infrastructure. It may be web services related, but it's not going to want to run in your traditional OS-centric way. So the arrival of platforms into the enterprise is very, very fast.
Lance?
I think that I generally agree with what people are saying as far as how access to your information is going to change. Carrying it around with you on your laptop is going to die. You're going to have to keep it somewhere that's centralized, you can access from many, many different kinds of portable devices. You asked for black swans, and so a cautionary tale which is playing out right now was when thick applications were first made their round of let's make everything accessible via the web. At that time, the standards that we used to access web were not as solid as they are today. And a particular company made a combined access method and backend for the server that were mated very tightly, and we call it Internet Explorer 6. And I think
there's a lot of dependencies on it too.
Now, Black Swan might be a very nice name for it. I'm sure we could come up with something a little uglier and closer to the truth. But people are living with this legacy of what they were encouraged, what they thought was the future then of I'm getting rid of my thick apps, and I'm going to make this universal access through the web using IE6, using my tried and trusted Microsoft tools, and they are tied to it even today, even though it's known to have more flaws than anything that we've talked about so far, and they simply can't afford to get off. So what we're seeing is a standards effort today to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And we know it's going to happen again.
From some
and
other
that's
point.
going to be a lot of fun.
Right. So,
by the way, I think the security angle is the black swan. So, in general, we think of virtualization too much in the context of server virtualization. There is a phenomenal consequence, or maybe it's consequence of virtualization, which is that security is a platform property. It is not a property of an endpoint, whether that endpoint be a client device, what's McAfee on my iPad or my Android device, but it's also not a property of a service system. And so security is a platform property. And that is a profound change for the security industry, which has not been addressed at all.
It's a platform property, and it has to be part of the application that you deploy. It has to be someone's property, and it has to be carried around with it.
So I'm going to kind of bring an end to this conversation and change the tenor. Our audience has been sitting here patiently listening to us. As the moderator, I get one last shot. And in terms of thinking about where the surprises are coming, I don't know whether they're all good or bad surprises, but three things come to mind. One, in the next 2 or 3 years, the Internet of Things. More things throwing out a lot more data, being collected analyzed, utilized using cloud computing is going to make some fundamental changes. It's going to change the business, change economics. We don't know what else it's going to do. Thinking about economics, the economics of energy, it could make a very, very big change in terms of the economics that drive companies, customers to cloud computing or to different kinds of cloud computing than others. I don't know ultimately what the right answer is, but energy and the costs involved with the thinking about costs of cloud computing is going to be under inspection even more over the course of the next few years than it has in the past. The third is arguably very dark, and that is the fact that right now, probably the most successful and perhaps the largest cloud in the world are botnets. And these are vile, nasty beasts. Cloud computing is probably going to be the answer in dealing with them. And I would imagine that network virtualization in particular will have a lot to do with battling it. But once again, I don't know what the actual surprise is going to be, but my guess is in the next 2 or 3 years we'll have one. With that, I would like to invite questions from the audience. And we'd ask you to just give us your name and use the microphone.
Thank you. Rich Peranto. When you say that... Okay. Rich Peranto. When you say that security is a characteristic of the platform, are you talking about our application platform, or are you talking about the virtualization data center platform?
Security really needs to be a property of the applications and the data that it's using.
That's how I interpreted your answer. I wanted to clarify that.
Right.
Okay.
It's part of the infrastructure. Well, the infrastructure that delivers the application needs to be instrumental in the whole security.
So the security is part of our platform. It's our responsibility to know how to accomplish the security in our application platform. And in order for that not to be a barrier for all of us that are doing startup work and working to move our companies through very quickly forward, how do we find a standard, a prototype, a template for the application security that we can rely on so we don't each have to discover it for ourselves?
Are they all one-off?
It's a very good question. It's not clear that they're... I mean, what we said is that the security is intrinsically and fundamentally part of the semantics of what you're trying to do. That's hard. There are some things that the low-level bits of the infrastructure can do, the obvious things. We're all familiar with those. By the way, those are definitely part of the low-level infrastructure and definitely out of the game of the traditional AV guys. But you know, the notion of an operating system and its role in trying to police security is definitely gone, simply because you cannot do it. I think we've made very little progress broadly as an industry in trying to define security contexts or security languages around application logic that allow us to take this notion of secure by design much further than we are today. I think it remains a major challenge.
I think on the whole point of security in applications and data, kind of interesting how we always move data around, and wherever the data goes, different security policies suddenly apply. And I think that is something we'll have to work on over the next few years here, that the data itself is secure. Right. So it's not the platform it happens to sit on or the application it happens to be part of that controls, but the data itself comes with it.
And just to make a point on that, we're going to have application mobility, much finer grained, such that the data will remain in place. Could be because somebody has passed a regulation that it must not leave these boundaries, either a corporate wall or a country's boundary, in which case workloads are going to move to the data. So again, it's new approaches. Next question.
My name is Johannes Ernst. Cloud is a new platform, and in the history of computing, every time there's a new platform, sooner or later we have API wars. And we saw that with mainframes and PCs and so forth and so forth. So far, by and large, I can run my software on pretty much everybody's cloud, with minor sort of differences, but it's minor. Are we going to see some major API wars coming up? And more specifically, there was an open source announcement from one of the gentlemen of the panel this morning. Is that a shot in an API war?
Oh, I think it was the inverse, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I can pat him on the back for once in my life. No,
What Simon's trying to say is the API war is over. We made our announcement today, and you'll all be using it, right?
right. We might port it to OpenStack or something.
Right.
But broadly, the way I interpret the VMware, let's be very clear, what the VMware announcement was that VMware is a platform which will support multiple application development frameworks and languages, which is a good thing. And therein, it is not about APIs. That is specific. You can choose whatever you want, as long as the programming abstraction you're choosing is rich enough for you. You're good to go. And so I think at that point there is no API issue at all. It's not, certainly not at the infrastructural level that we would care about. Right?
I think that's right. Not only does it give you a framework for using different development platforms and a unified way of pushing your code out to different platform as a service providers, but it also gives a way for hooking up to services that are available within these differentiated providers in a way that's common among hopefully all of them. And this is open source. This is something that we're giving out the core of it to the community.
So it may be a battle for toolstream ownership. So for example, if you look at, say, I mean, why would you run your app on Microsoft Azure versus any other .NET thingy that somebody could build, including one that VMware announced today or other announcements? The answer is that probably the .NET developer is sitting within a Microsoft toolstream, and there will appear a button at some point by which push the button, it will show up on their cloud. Okay, that's fine. That's a good place to go and differentiate.
The only thing I'll just add to this, I mean, I do think that the clouds are prescribed stacks. And APIs are expressions of those. And the world, I think, wants standards. I think it does. And there's a reason why Angry Birds only builds for 4 phones, 3 phones. Because they're not going to build for 15 phones. And so we do need some standards. And I think that, I think that, VMware, Amazon, OpenStack. I mean, I think to me, there's going to be others probably. There's not going to be 15. Now, within those standards, there can be multiple deployments. You can deploy, if you're on an OpenStack cloud, you can deploy lots of different ways to do things. But I think that the world is going to have a relatively small number of very strong API standards.
By the way, the
I believe I
argument
disagree
of
with
cloud
that.
does strongly motivate in favor of critical mass. That is, fewer, larger players. What I've seen is a traditional software vendor and the reseller channel, very heavily focused on that. A large number of the resellers of software have now turned into managed service providers running our software or others vendors' software as a service for their customers who no longer want to run IT. That's a small localized service. I think that's going to remain for a very long period of time. But in the big cloud world, there will be relatively few. They will be very big. The reason that there will be a relatively few of them is because you look at folks like Google. These are software houses that have got large numbers of servers. Same as Amazon. Software house, large number of servers. Rackspace taking the opposite approach, which is get everybody to work on an alternative model, 100% open source, monetize the heck out of that, and run it at massive scale. But run at a massive scale, I will.
Kai, you?
I'm going to disagree with some of this because I think, first of all, the API wars, I think, didn't come about because somebody wanted an API war or wanted to disagree with somebody else's APIs, but because people were building platforms or defining API sets for different purposes. And naturally, you end up with different sets of APIs. And I think that is what we're going to see here as well, that on a certain level, just as the world doesn't have too many operating systems today, on a certain level, there might be a few standards. But as soon as you start moving up the stack, I think you said it earlier, there's going to be a flood of applications hitting us. Of course, all of these applications are going to expose different sets of APIs. Somewhere in the stack, you're going to start getting this divergence because the purpose of these things are all different.
And a flood of different application delivery or application development abstractions. So let's not kid ourselves that we're done at .NET or just some Java thing, right?
Exactly.
If you look at iCloud here in Berkeley, it's just a Python library and it just runs stuff in a cloud or or Heroku, whatever.
And those are not programming models that I can build a business application. I need abstraction layers on top of that, and they are naturally going to be different depending on what type of application.
And don't you also think that the result of, especially at the upper layers, the proliferation of APIs is likely to create a new kind of cloud economy where new services arise who are trusted third-party brokers, not broker of resources, but acting as transit points, gateways, translations,
Sure.
the glue between some of these APIs. It will be a business class in and of itself.
Oh, absolutely it will, but and so where's the big disruption? The big disruption is in the route to market for the traditional ISV or hardware vendor. I mean, first of all, I think of Google as a hardware vendor. I just happen to come with a whole bunch of preloaded software on it, right? Same with Amazon and Rackspace. And so I don't have to go and buy hardware anymore. But in general, the traditional value-added, the distribution model for a software vendor is changing radically.
Right.
And you no longer have to field a sales force or whatever. But the whole go-to-market has changed.
Right.
We had this epiphany recently. Go back 6-7 years when we did a lot of work on service-oriented architectures. We were very concerned that people would copy our interfaces and rebuild our apps, essentially.
Basically reverse engineer them, right?
Yes, about a year ago we realized that's exactly what we want to have.
Exactly.
People just adopt. You can all go copy our interfaces, go build something, but use our interface. Don't use somebody else's.
Yeah.
But it took us about 5 years to get to that. But I think that's how these things are going to.
Right. It's going to change our business in some fundamental ways. So, Johannes, thank you for the question.
As I put more and more data into the cloud in one place, there's an intrinsic value to that data. It's pretty obvious that it's a right, that it's secure against the evil guys, the bad guys, the people who want to get access to it. But there's also a lot of a lot of valuable information that can be gleaned from that. Would you say that my privacy, my ability to protect my data from the good guy, from the person hosting it, is that a privilege or is that a right? Is that something I should demand, or is it something that I shop around and may or may not get?
So in terms of the security thing, let me just be very clear. I think it is absolutely clear that within a very small period of time, every single bit of data that you put in the cloud will be encrypted at rest. It will be in the clear only when stuff that you legitimately allowed to process it is processing it, and then it will be encrypted again. And the key that is used to decrypt it will be provided by you when you run the app. Okay? That problem is going to be solved. There's no issue about it.
I'd even go further to say that in addition to that kind of encryption, what you will see is getting to the point where you have the notion of provenance of data.
Yeah.
You can see where it's been, who's touched it, how it's moved. Having that kind of a trackable, traceable history for important pieces of your data, along with this kind of encryption, I think addresses, not perfectly, but addresses a lot of the kinds of issues you're raising. But they're real issues. The question is, when does the economics and when does the technology kind of all come together at the right place where we have that?
Bigger question is more from in terms of unencrypted data lying around. It's in the consumer cloud. That's more of a worry.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
Also, I think hidden in your question is there's value there? Is someone going to go take that value? First of all, if a hoster or something like that is sort of trying to sneak value out of your data, they're not going to be in business for it. This is something that protecting our customers' data for us, this is the thing we deal with all the time in terms of what are our policies and procedures, what are our systems, what are our logging tools, all this kind of stuff. This is a fundamental right.
And in the
your data.
and in the consumer world, it's something you do very deliberately and very openly. You know that Google's going to mine your data and try and sell you stuff. You just know it, or Facebook, or somebody, right? And but by the way, but
first of all, I mean, the first the first answer is transparency.
Right.
And for sure, in consumer world, we say we use the data to provide a better service to you, and yes, to show more relevant ads to you, and we at all times try to be as transparent as we can in language that makes sense to mere mortals, not lawyers, with what we're doing. And I think in the consumer world, that's the right answer. When we
Google
provide
the industry with this ability to see all the data that you have on me and for me to delete it, that's a big deal.
That's right, we do. You can see every bit of data you have in Google. You can choose to eradicate all of it if you will. You can opt out. So that's one thing. On the business side, just our position is, and we state very clearly in our contracts, the only way we use your data is to provide the service to you that you've contracted for us. That's it. We aren't using it to mine or go do anything else. It goes nowhere else. Now, data mining is such a loaded term to say, you could say data mining is used by anyone who does spam prevention, because you can't prevent spam without looking electronically at the contents of a document. So any email system in the world, if you want to say, does it do data mining? Yes. But it's very clear what you mean by that. And I think the response is equally clear. No, at least I can certainly speak for Google. We don't use your data in ways that aren't to deliver you the service we're providing.
I think we've gone a little off track here on some of the questions, and I'd rather like to flip it around. I think when we look back in a few years, we're going to see that the services that are accessible to your data, business intelligence, accounting, other kinds of packages that are co-located, not in the cloud that's being a little intellectually lazy, but being available in the cloud that you selected to put it in is going to be why you're going to put it there in the first place. Mm-hmm. So it's access to those services and the protection that's around it and the SLAs that are around it that are going to make it valuable, and that's why you're going to do it. And we'll look back and say, well, of course, just like the information that currently is living in everyone's laptops is now going into centralized desktop images and data centers, it's going to move to other places so that you can get more value out of it.
My name is Shervin. As the problem of trust and ownership just came by, I want to know who sets the laws for the cloud.
I'm sorry, could you speak up a little?
Yeah, who sets the laws for the cloud? So the problems of jurisdiction and ownership and probably copyright and these kind of things.
Well, the government, of course.
Yeah, you start there with the government, but
it's an interesting question, because which government?
Yeah, and when we live in a cloud that crosses all kinds of boundaries and borders, the question of whose jurisdiction or which jurisdictions in parallel, if any, have sway on who can do what with the data and when, and thereafter, what must they do with the data exhaust. So, it starts with the whole notion of, who owns data, who has the right to make a law or make a distinction about what you can and can't do with it. If the data is about a transaction and the transaction tends to be either legal or illegal, in which country, in which venue. When we're talking about a cloud which often hides the specific location of a datum, is itself a late binding decision where some particular transaction is going to be executed from a computer science point of view. We are living in a place where new law and new definition really does have to be established. I don't think there is an answer that anyone on this panel is going to be able to provide to you tonight.
No, but I could give you some examples of how our customers have been very creative in this area.
Please.
One example is when we started doing virtual desktops, we've had customers that were very excited about this because their developers were overseas, but the servers they were accessing were in North America. Therefore, their lawyers told them they did not have to pay any import tax on the software they developed because it was developed in
the U.S.
In the U.S. That's right.
Very creative.
Very nice.
Now, we've also had banking customers that use virtual desktops, and when a certain country raided the bank and took all of the computers, which were, of course, thin clients, the bankers went to the local Starbucks equivalent, opened up their laptops, and continued banking because all of their data was housed in Europe. So there's a lot of creativity that we've already seen in this area of locality and regulation, jurisdiction.
And as is often the case, law is often not made until after something happens.
Yeah, and
These
so
are
there's
retroactive.
some very interesting consequential occurrences that happen there. So Lance used the disaster recovery example. So
the disaster was when they raided the office.
Right. But the employee can go home and access corporate data on a PC that they use for normal consumer behaviors, or they can just run it on an iPad. So one of the interesting trends that I'm seeing is this degree of concern. So cloud is addressing my needs as a consumer. We have a much better consumer experience, by the way, than we do an enterprise employee experience, because the enterprise apps are terrible. And so we're all delighted by what we find on the web. And so the challenge is that we want to use consumer devices to access enterprise stuff. And so the bring your own device into the enterprise context is a big deal. And then it's not clear. The jurisdictional issue there is, whose device is it? Well, it happens to be my iPad or my tablet, the device that I brought in. I'm accessing this stuff from my enterprise. There's a jurisdictional issue there. But also the employee acting on a corporate device has consumer behaviors and enterprise behaviors. And it's the consumer behavior that threatens the enterprise most. And we all, anybody who has a laptop, violates corporate security policies 100% of the time. And so, and we walk the threats into our enterprise.
Right.
That's the biggest vector of threat.
We
so
are
there
the threat.
Huge jurisdictional issues there.
Thank you for the question. Yes.
My name is Adi Berglas, and looking back at the IT industry and the next best thing, timeshare, mainframe, centralized computing, decentralized computing, going back to centralized computing, what are the things that you're trying to learn from the past and not repeat it? And what are the things that keep you up at night and make you worried about cloud computing?
Ooh, good question.
I'll have a stab at it. So I don't think that, because we're in Oracle land and it's easy, I don't think that Oracle Exadata or Exalogic is cloud. I just don't. That is, I think of it as a mainframe. It has all the bad properties of mainframe and none of the good properties. Okay, so what we've learned, I believe, with open systems, the innovation rate is high. And you can take a ton of compute, jam it in a box, and make it a little bit more flexible and easier to manage. That is not an open system because it loses out on the ecosystem's ability to bring value. And so what we've learned from, I think, building these massive scaled-out clouds, you have horizontal layers, multiple horizontal layers, is that the rate of innovation that you get there is phenomenal. And that legacy players, and by the way, the legacy business is going to remain forever. Right? Large airlines still run on Windows 3.1. So they'll be around for a while. What we've learned, though, is that if you want to take advantage of the new will not happen in a mainframe-like world. Okay, so these heavily integrated, vertically integrated systems, which, hey, they may be x86, they may be running logic or whatever, but they are kind of mainframes. Those things are, by virtue of being single vendor, not cloud, They are not elastic. They are not giving you the economics that you can get if you adopt a truly scaled-out approach where an ecosystem can innovate on each one of the layers and deliver you a particular value proposition. And so one of the things that I'm adamant about, more passionate about in cloud, is the whole notion that the ecosystem on top of a cloud is far more vibrant than the traditional ISV system that has faced the enterprise. The rate of innovation of new stuff that enterprises can take advantage of is phenomenal and far greater than in the traditional world.
I'd like to answer that. I think that was a good question. What lessons are there to be learned from the past? One of them that I think is important is that you cannot force fit technology. Trying to say this is how our company runs, this is what we do, and assume your employees will fit to it, I think today is a recipe for disaster. It makes people do strange things to get their job done. It makes strange behavior, make unhappy, unproductive people. And the way the old world of IT was built was this ring fence approach, all about standardization on a certain set of type of equipment or gear, operating system, or what have you, and a ring fence firewall that is allegedly going to provide protection. The real world, sort of hit that like a lightning bolt, and all of a sudden people needed VPN access, and all of a sudden they were using thumb drives because it was the only way they could bring something home, or they were doing some other thing that you might think of as illicit activity. What it really was them just trying to get their job done. So I think the new world of IT is that you serve the employee. That may sound obvious, but you serve the employee first in terms of getting their job done. And I think that's the nature of, that's what's possible today. The other part of the question, which I thought was good, is what keeps us up. And I'll tell you my perspective, what keeps me up. The more successful we are in our enterprise business, yes, the more data we hold, the more sort of critical services we run for more types of companies or schools or whatever it is, or individuals around the world. And so the burden on us, the responsibility on us goes up every day. And I envision that day when which is not far away, there's hundreds of millions of individuals who getting their job done every day depends on us running a virtually flawless system, which is always impossible. Right. So living with that, and it's not like the old world of software. You ship something, you get bug reports back, you do patches and releases. It's not that anymore. It is you live with somebody minute by minute every day, and we don't always do it right. We fall down sometimes. We try to learn from that, but that burden on us only gets bigger. And I can tell you with utmost sincerity, when there's a glitch in Gmail and Twitter lights up so much that it brings Twitter down,
As a
there's
result,
just a phenomenal amount of angst and pain in Mountain View. And
talk about a cascading failure, right?
Yeah, and we like to think we're getting better at these things, but at the same time, the responsibility is getting bigger too. So the angst and the sleepless nights never go away.
I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking our panel this evening. I think they've done an excellent job. Oh, we have one more question? Mm-hmm.
So you just brought up the thing that keeps me up at night, which is when I talk to people and I find that in your unauditable implementation of some access to data that people want to use in the cloud, they are taking shortcuts. They want to be faster, they want to be lighter weight, and they think that having the data in 2 or 3 memory banks is good enough because those 2 or 3 machines won't all crash at once. And if that happens and they don't have it on some physical media that can be recovered, it's gone forever. And someone is going to get caught out on that.
I hope you're not referring to us. We back up the tape.
That's right.
Any other responses?
Well, the question related to SEC compliance on the backup. And I mean, look, what you're talking about is automation of a process. Doesn't matter whether somebody copies stuff onto tape and then takes it off site in a van, or whether it dribbles out over a wire to someplace else. so on. What matters is that you have the same access, you have the same control, and the same ability to ensure that the veracity of what is there. What's missing is the legal wrappers around it related to under whose jurisdiction the data is, whether it's under your control all times, and those sorts of things. And the legal frameworks have a long way to go to catch up.
Yeah, so the only thing I would say is every cloud service should be very transparent in what you're getting. So you have to make a decision, is it good enough for you? So,
or is it good
But
enough
the funny
for
thing
your
is
auditor?
everybody uses
Is
Colo.
it good enough for your auditor?
well, I mean, no, look, we offer cloud storage that is replicated X number of times. You know, we offer tape. We offer, I mean, it depends on what you need to secure and, you know, and feel comfortable. I mean, you're right. There are, if you have the characteristics of the service, you should be able to make a very informed decision. This should not be a black box. These things should be explainable and understood, and you should know what you're getting. And these things should not be a mystery.
Something that was drilled into me by many of our customers, and that you can take when you're making your decisions on which cloud to use and why, is amateurs talk about backup, professionals talk about recovery. And if you can't have a good recovery story from your provider, go to the next one.
So
We're willing to pay for it.
right.
I mean, you know,
If you're not willing to pay for it,
Well,
you know, I mean,
no,
anyone can have a great recovery strategy. You just got to be ready to pay.
Right.
right.
This is the problem. I mean, these things cost money.
they cost money.
Good.
Certain data is not worth spending that money on. So you got to figure out what you're getting. I mean, all data needs its own architecture, its own strategy, and there's tons of services and tons of different levels of services. They're offered, and so and I'm sure there's a cloud provider out there that can meet your
Meet
needs.
your requirements.
No longer doing what you're
I never knew that Google backed up YouTube on tape.
So let me ask you to join me in thanking our panel tonight, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you for joining us.
Okay. On behalf of Churchill Club, GABA, and our audience, I'd like to thank our speakers for sharing your perspectives with us so freely and having a real conversation on stage. Rich, thank you for delivering this conversation. And we know that all of you have many demands on your time, and we do appreciate that you chose to spend the evening with us tonight. So thank you very much. And thanks to SAP for hosting and sponsoring this program. And thanks to all of you. You've been a great audience. Hope to see you soon. Good night.